Vivian Nagy stood barefoot in the rain, her white nightgown clinging to her skin like the truth she had refused to see for too long. In her trembling hands, she held a brown envelope, torn, wet, but heavy with betrayal. Inside were documents. Legal ones. Deeds. Company shares. All signed, all gone. Her name erased. Her life rewritten. How did it get to this? She was a good woman. A devoted mother. A loyal wife. She cooked, she cleaned, she raised 2 children almost single-handedly. She built Nagy Ventures with her own sweat. The company her late father left her was barely crawling when she took it over. Now, it was one of the biggest agro-export companies in southeastern Nigeria. Yet somehow, everything, the mansion, the cars, the firm, even her children's trust funds, was no longer in her name. Her husband, the same man she once nursed through typhoid in a hospital corridor because they couldn't afford a private room, had done the unthinkable. Vivian met Charles Okoro at university. He was handsome, soft-spoken, and always ready to help with group projects. While others saw him as average, Vivian saw potential. She believed in building, in growing love from humble beginnings. She introduced him to her father, not as the rich chief of NG community, but as her daddy. She never flaunted her wealth. Her father wasn't pleased. He has no roots, no foundation. Be careful, my daughter, he had warned. But Vivian was already in love. By the time they married, her father gave her one of his estates as a wedding gift, a beautiful 6-bedroom duplex. He also handed her a 40% share in the family company. Your future is secure, he said. She smiled. Her security was in her husband, she believed. Vivian didn't just build a company. She built a man. When Charles couldn't find a job after their wedding, it was Vivian who convinced the board to give him a position at Nagy Ventures. He started in logistics, and she personally trained him. She sat late at night, drawing up marketing strategies, while nursing their baby with one arm and balancing budget sheets with the other. Her cousins raised eyebrows. Vivian, why are you putting him ahead of us? His family, she always said with a smile. But behind that smile, she was exhausted. Physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Still, she believed in their future. When she promoted Charles to managing director just 3 years later, she didn't know she was handing him the knife he would later stab her with. As Charles rose in rank, his demeanor shifted. The man who used to rush home to make her laugh after tough meetings now barely texted her back. His smile faded. His tone hardened. Where there was once gratitude, now there was entitlement. You wouldn't understand how these things work, Vivian, he said one evening as they argued over a multi-million naira export deal. Just let me handle it. She blinked. I was handling this before you ever walked into my life. And look where it got you, doing everything alone like a village woman. Let the men do the big work now. That night, she cried in silence, her head buried in the pillow while Charles slept beside her, snoring, carefree, indifferent. Then came the secretaries. He started hiring only young, attractive women, insisting they were smart and aggressive marketers. One of them, Ngozi, was barely 23 but began calling the house line frequently, always asking if Oga was around or free to talk. Once, Vivian overheard a giggle over the phone, followed by, "You didn't tell me Madam was around." Still, she said nothing. Vivian believed women who built empires had to learn patience, not suspicion. But patience was wearing thin. Then came the missing files. Company documents would vanish from her desk and reappear with edits she never approved. Her personal office email suddenly got locked. When she confronted the IT guy, he nervously whispered that Oga Charles said you're on maternity break. Again. Vivian had given birth to their second child just 6 months earlier, and while recovering, she chose to take a break and be present at home. But unknown to her, Charles wasn't just filling her position temporarily, he was replacing her entirely. He told staff to stop copying her in executive decisions. He dissolved the procurement committee she formed. He even changed the company logo, without her signature. One evening, as she prepared egusi soup in the kitchen, her son toddled in with a paper he found in the study. "Mummy," See Daddy's signature. She froze. It wasn't just Charles' signature, it was hers. Perfectly forged. And it was on a property document. Her hand trembled as she took the paper, her eyes scanning the contents. The deed to one of their warehouses had been signed over to him. She stormed upstairs to confront him, but he wasn't there. He had gone on a business trip to Abuja. Vivian felt her world cracking, but still, she kept hope alive. "He's my husband," she whispered to herself, gripping her chest as she sat on the cold tile floor, documents scattered around her like broken promises. Vivian had barely healed from the shock of the forged documents and the divorce papers when another wound was opened. This time, it pierced straight through her heart. Charles wasn't just stealing her assets. He was replacing her. Less than 2 weeks after she was kicked out of her own home, Vivian returned, not to beg, but to confront. She stood outside the gate with her head held high. A woman who had lost everything, yet still carried herself with quiet dignity. The maid opened the gate. "Madam, Oga say make I no allow you in. He's not around." But as Vivian tried to speak, she heard it. A laugh. High-pitched. Feminine. Careless. She turned her head, and there she was. A woman in red satin, walking confidently down the same marble staircase Vivian once decorated every Christmas with her children. She held a glass of wine and wore Vivian's necklace. It wasn't just any woman. It was the young lawyer who had helped Charles with the land transfers. Her name was Ijeoma, a name that now echoed like betrayal in Vivian's ears. Vivian couldn't breathe. She had signed nothing. She had no idea this same Ijeoma had sat in boardrooms, smiled at her, even called her Ma, while secretly rewriting her future with Charles behind her back. Now, this woman wore her jewelry, slept in her bed, drove her car. And Charles? He didn't hide it. "Charles, you brought her into my home. This house was a gift, Vivian. I just made better use of it. I gave you everything, my father's company, my inheritance, my trust. You gave me access, Vivian. You should have known I'd learn to use it." He had not only stolen her home, he had rewritten history. To the world, he told a different story. That Vivian was mentally unstable. That she couldn't handle the pressure of motherhood. That she voluntarily stepped down from the company. And the worst part? People believed him. Her own cousins distanced themselves. Investors pulled out. Friends stopped answering her calls. To them, she had simply disappeared. While Ijeoma posed in newspapers as the new corporate partner of Naji Ventures, holding hands with Charles at gala events. But Vivian wasn't broken. She was only bent. She had lost everything, except herself. And that would be Charles' greatest mistake. A woman betrayed, stripped of everything she owned, but about to rise again. Not as a wife, not as a daughter, but as a warrior. Stripped of her home, erased from her father's legacy, shunned by the world she once knew. Vivian found herself starting again, from nothing. She moved into a one-bedroom flat in the outskirts of Abakpa, a far cry from the luxurious estate she once owned. The compound was cracked concrete, the walls stained with time, and the roof moaned when the rain came. She shared the space with her 2 children, the only ones who chose her when the world turned its back. Gone were the silk curtains. Gone were the chefs and drivers. Gone was the maid who used to iron her clothes. Now, Vivian cooked on a single stove, boiling water over a rusted gas cylinder, her hands calloused from washing, cleaning, and feeding, not just her children, but a hope she refused to let die. The woman who once sealed million-naira deals in designer suits was now frying puff-puff before sunrise. She sold food in traffic, moi-moi, jollof, and stew-packed coolers balanced in a rickety tricycle. She learned to smile at strangers, to ignore insults, to accept pity without shame. Each day she pushed herself harder, not for revenge, but for survival. And slowly, something shifted. People began to notice her food. Not just for the taste, but for the story that came with it. The grace, the humility, the strength. She got her first contract from a local church to cater a small wedding. Then another. And another. Her business, Vivian's Kitchen, was born not in a boardroom, but in a storm of rejection. She reinvested every naira, every drop of sweat. She rented a larger flat, hired 2 helpers, bought a used delivery van. What began with shame grew into strength. One day, she stood in front of a new building, bigger than anything she had owned before. Not gifted by her father, not linked to her ex-husband, but built by her hands, her pain, and her fire. On its glass doors, the sign glistened in the sun. Vivian's Kitchen and Catering Services Limited. This time, her name was etched in steel. This time, no one could take it away. She had been cast out like a beggar, but she rose like a queen, not by tearing others down, but by building a throne from dust. The world had underestimated her, but she had become unstoppable. Years passed. The woman they thought had perished in disgrace had risen into a storm. Vivian wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Her business stood tall. Her name commanded respect. Her silence had become louder than any revenge. And then, the unthinkable happened. The mansion, her mansion, was listed for auction. Debt, mismanagement, scandal. What was once a palace of pride had become a burden to the man who stole it. Vivian didn't gloat. She didn't shout. She simply walked into the bank, head high, heels clicking softly like thunder approaching, and paid for it. In full. In cash. The house that was taken from her was now bought back by her. She stood before the black iron gates once again. But this time, there were no tears. No black polythene bag. No rain soaking her shame. Only sunlight, power, and peace. The housekeeper recognized her, aged, worn, but stunned. Inside, the mansion still bore fragments of her past. Faded wallpaper, chipped tiles, rooms haunted by memory. But she didn't flinch. She walked through it, like a queen reclaiming her kingdom. Room by room, memory by memory. She took it all back. Charles had lost everything. The empire he hijacked had collapsed. The board forced him out. Clients pulled away. His mistress disappeared the moment the accounts ran dry. And now, he was sick. Word spread that he was living in a rented boys' quarters on the outskirts of town. Weak, alone, and forgotten. One evening, a call came through. It was him, begging for help. Vivian didn't curse him. She didn't insult him. She simply remembered. She remembered standing in the rain, barefoot, with a bag of clothes and a broken heart. She remembered being told she was nothing. She remembered watching her life crumble at the hands of the man she once loved. But she also remembered who she became. And in that moment, she smiled. Not with spite, but with freedom. Vivian was no longer the woman who had everything taken from her. She was the woman who built something greater from nothing. And now, when she stood before that mansion, she no longer saw pain, only proof that even after betrayal, destruction, and loss, a woman can rise, stronger, wiser, unshakable. Time did what it always does. It revealed everything. Vivian had chosen silence, not because she was weak, but because she knew karma speaks louder than revenge. And when karma finally spoke, it whispered through the crumbling walls of a rented boys' quarters, where Charles now lay, sick, forgotten, and drowning in his own choices. The empire he stole had collapsed into dust. Naji Ventures, once her father's legacy, had been dragged into scandal. Tax fraud, staff exodus, investor withdrawal. Board members resigned, the media feasted, and shareholders screamed. But no one reached for Charles. The same hands that applauded him now pointed in blame. He was no longer the great CEO. He was a man with nothing, no company, no mansion, no woman. Just debts. And regrets. Ijeoma, the mistress who once called herself co-founder, vanished the day the bank accounts ran dry. The luxury cars were repossessed. The friends stopped coming. He was left with a mattress on a cracked floor, and memories that wouldn't let him sleep. The sickness came quietly. First, a cough. Then pain. Then the silence that follows when no one answers your calls. He tried to reach out. To the woman he called nothing. The same woman who once begged him in the rain. Now he was the one with a trembling voice, holding a plastic bag of hospital bills, and staring at a door she now owned. But Vivian didn't need to slam that door shut. It had already closed itself. She simply stood, composed, graceful, unmoved. Because some answers don't come in words. They come in stillness, in success, in rising, in silence. She didn't have to prove anything anymore. The world had watched. The same people who once whispered behind her back now used her name as a symbol of strength. The woman Charles discarded was now a national award-winning entrepreneur, a speaker, a mother, a warrior. She didn't just reclaim her life. She reinvented it. And so, karma did not scream. It didn't come with fire or thunder. It came in the form of a woman who chose peace over revenge, success over bitterness, and legacy over noise. Because in the end, the loudest revenge is the life you rise into.